As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
Senate Republicans blocked a motion to advance a massive $111 billion spending package that includes military aid for Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan. And they did this over a partisan dispute on border issues. They're still negotiating with the Democrats, and they said they would block this bill, and they did. So this effort failed in a vote of 49-51, with every Republican voting against the measure. Senator Bernie Sanders, who's an independent, technically, he does generally vote with Democrats, but he also voted no, and he did so due to his opposition to providing Israel with more unconditional military aid, as Israel is killing civilians on a massive scale in Gaza. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, he switched his vote to no when he realized that the bill was going to fail, and he had to do that in order to be able to bring it for a vote in the future. And this needed 60 votes to pass, and so it failed. It didn't come close to that. And President Biden initially requested $106 billion, and the Senate Democrats added another $5 billion to that because, why not throw a few more billion in there? The legislation now includes $67 billion to spend on Ukraine. That includes military and economic aid, and I believe some humanitarian assistance is in there. And the purpose of this is to fuel the war for a whole nother year and prop up the Ukrainian government, even as there's all these clear signs that Ukrainian forces don't have a chance of breaking through. They just want to keep this war going. That's literally the purpose, just to keep it going, not for a Ukrainian victory, because they know that's not going to happen. They just want people to keep fighting and dying. So the $111 billion also includes billions to beef up security at the border, but Republicans are looking to change laws, asylum laws and things like that, to make it harder for migrants to get in. And doesn't seem like they're close to any deal. I'm not really sure of the behind the scenes stuff, but Schumer called this vote and they expected it to fail, and it did fail. So it's not clear what the next step is here. Unfortunately, I do think this is ultimately going to pass at some point, because these Republicans are blocking this for something kind of unrelated. And Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said Wednesday that Hezbollah must be pushed back from the Israeli border, and if it's not achieved through diplomatic means, Israel will take military action. So the comments suggest Israel is considering opening a second front in Lebanon beyond the cross-border strikes Israel and Hezbollah have been exchanging since October 7th. According to a recent report from Axios, some U.S. officials are concerned that Israel might provoke Hezbollah to justify a wider war in Lebanon. The report said that Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin had expressed concern in a phone call with Gallant in November about the risk of escalation on Israel's northern border. So it's important to keep in mind that U.S. officials are worried that it's Israel that's going to provoke a bigger war, a war in Lebanon. Gallant made the comments on Wednesday while visiting the northern coastal city of Nahariya. He said the Israeli government would not encourage the approximately 80,000 civilians who evacuated areas of northern Israel to return to their homes until Hezbollah is pushed back beyond the Litani River, which is 18 miles north of the Israel-Lebanon border in southern Lebanon. So at the end of the 2006 Israel-Lebanon war, UN Security Council Resolution 1701 established a demilitarized zone between the border and the Litani River, and that required Israeli forces to withdraw from southern Lebanon and Hezbollah to move north of the river. According to the Times of Israel, Gallant said that the best option would be to reach a diplomatic solution to agree on the enforcement of Resolution 1701, and that if that didn't happen, he said Israel would act with all the means at its disposal to push Hezbollah back through military action. And last month, Gallant made some pretty threatening comments toward the country of Lebanon, not just Hezbollah. He said that Israel could turn Beirut into Gaza. He said, quote, "Hezbollah is dragging Lebanon to a possible war and making mistakes. What we can do in Gaza, we can also do in Beirut." The U.S. announces a $175 million weapons package for Ukraine. So the Biden administration on Wednesday announced this new weapons package as President Biden pleaded with Congress to authorize more spending on the proxy war. So I mentioned this in an earlier article about the Senate blocking that bill, but I'll read another quote here from Biden about this. This was his little plea that he made on TV. He said, quote, "This cannot wait. Congress needs to pass supplemental funding for Ukraine before they break for the holiday recess. Simple as that. Frankly, I think it's stunning that we've gotten to this point in the first place. Republicans in Congress are willing to give Putin the greatest gift he can hope for and abandon our global leadership," end quote. So this weapons package, it includes AIM-9 and AIM-7 missiles for air defense, HIMARS ammunition, artillery rounds, high-speed anti-radiation missiles, TOW missiles, Javelin anti-tank missiles, more than 4 million rounds of small arms ammunition, vehicles to tow and haul equipment, demolition munitions, equipment to protect infrastructure, that's very vague, and then spare parts maintenance and all that. So they still have the money, what they call the Presidential Drawdown Authority, which lets the U.S. ship weapons directly from Pentagon stockpiles. By my count, they still have like over $4 billion left from the $6 billion that became available thanks to a Pentagon accounting error that they said they overvalued previous arms shipments, so it freed up all this money. And that's all they have left of what was authorized by Congress so far. So that's what they're using for this latest weapons package.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
The debacle of the nearly 20-year American occupation of Afghanistan continues in Joe Biden's America today. The disaster began when President George W. Bush, stung deeply by the intelligence that he failed to heed, thus enabling the attacks of 9/11 to take place unimpeded, convinced the American people in Congress and most of our allies that the bad guys who ran Afghanistan in the early part of the century needed to be taught a lesson, whether they personally enabled or facilitated the 9/11 attacks or not. And you go on to say more about George Bush. And again, 88% of the people believe this little clown boy. We're going to get that guy Osama bin Laden, dead or alive. That's a quote.
Yeah. Well, the reason I wrote the article is because the $2 trillion spent on Afghanistan, the 20-year occupation, the 850,000 deaths resulted in the same mindset occupying and taking over Afghanistan after American troops left as we tried to kick out. It was as if American hubris was blind to the efforts by British troops in the 19th century, about 20,000, and 100,000 Soviet troop deaths in the 20th century, both in efforts to bend the Afghan culture to their will, the British to the West, the Russians to their will. So under the guise of spreading democracy, an impossible task, Bush invaded. The invasion was not grounded on a declaration of war. We had no ability to declare war on the country of Afghanistan because that country's government did not invade us. Instead, the Congress and the Bush-Cheney regime came up with a novel idea, a monstrosity utterly unknown to the Constitution, called an AUMF, an authorization for use of military force. It doesn't name a target. It doesn't name an entity. It has no end. It can be used anytime you want. So Bush's successors have used it to kill people who were infants at the time it was enacted. It purports to authorize the American president to kill anybody he wants that arguably had anything to do with 9/11, even if they were babies at the time of 9/11. That monstrosity manifests the mindset of American hubris, that we are the essential country, Joe Biden's phrase, that we can spread our Americanism wherever we want to go. Before we started this show this morning, you read something to me I hadn't heard, which is a quote from Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin, which mimics this very theme and condemns people like you and I and the hundreds of thousands listening to us now who want peace.
And so what you're saying about what's going on, and people also, again, we wrote about this judge in detail in the Trends Journal. Afghans said, listen, let's talk about this. We had nothing to do with it. Bush's words were, there are no time to talk. And they were saying that the reason we were invading Afghanistan was because Osama bin Laden was hiding there and they were protecting him.
That's about as realistic as Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction and therefore we must invade Iraq. This is the reason that Bush and Cheney are guilty of war crimes for killing human beings under false pretenses and dragging the United States into wars under false pretenses.
How come the Pope isn't saying, I want all you Catholic people to stand up and protest at what's going on in Gaza as they're slaughtering people in front of everybody's eyes?
Right.
Nearly 17,000 people killed.
Well, more civilians killed in Gaza in 8 weeks than killed in Ukraine in 18 months, because the Israeli government, the Netanyahu regime, is engaged in an act of genocide, and Putin is engaged in a serious military endeavor to stop the Nazis from bombing the Russian cultural people in eastern Ukraine. And of course, the United States somehow still supports Ukraine. The Congress will debate this week or next $68 billion that old Joe wants to give to Ukraine. Even Lindsey Graham, who never met somebody else's blood that he didn't want to shed, is having misgivings about it. Oh, and let's not forget another $13 billion to the Israelis. We've given them so far 15,000 bombs and 57,000 artillery shells, and basically said, oh, here they are, but don't use them, which is absurd. Absurd. Tony Blinken has no credibility whatsoever. Joe Biden has no credibility whatsoever.
Tell the people, what is Defend the Guard first?
So Defend the Guard is simple legislation that says that without a formal declaration of war from Congress, as prescribed in the Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, right, that the states will prohibit their National Guard from deploying into overseas active combat.
Now tell us, on the primary ballot, what do you mean? It just means it'll be a referendum statewide that happens to coincide with the primary elections instead of the
Yeah,
state?
the primary. So if you're voting Republican in Texas, which is a good chunk of Texas, you will have this on your ballot.
And so, well, I guess I'm confused then. So it ain't for a law, it's for inside the Republican Party to...
It's a ballot proposition, and essentially what this tells the lawmakers is, let's say 85%, 90% say they support this. This tells the lawmakers, hey, 90% of your constituents want Defend the Guard passed.
I see. So this is a referendum inside the Republican Party of Texas.
Correct.
I see. And so what's your strength look like there? What do you think?
Well, the good part is that some of the weakest ballot propositions that have come forward still get about 75%. So
this is not a weak one. This is a big deal to everyone.
This is a big deal. And here's the thing: I was at the convention, so you know we were moving this, and I was talking to the folks of it's like the State Republican Executive Committee, which is like the SREC, and this is where resolutions, ballot propositions, all of this stuff, the Republican Party comes together to get all this stuff squared away. As I'm explaining this, everybody, it just made sense to them, and the easiest part was like, why can't we focus on our border rather than Ukraine's? And that everybody, like, they threw up their hands and yelled hallelujah.
Wait, not everybody knows everything in there, but these are some of the most basic things. Torture is banned, right? And presidential wars are banned by the U.S. Constitution. And so all you're doing is saying, I just came home from the wars, and I think we need to start obeying the law now. I don't know, Diego. That seems fair to me.
I don't even think it's knowledge of the Constitution. Like, some people that don't even understand, and it's not a knock, but like, Dan was on Jimmy Dore show, and he started talking about the 10th Amendment, and Jimmy Dore's like, what's that? So it's not even knowledge of the Constitution that would make you go, yeah, rah, rah, rah. And I love Jimmy. That's not a knock, but you don't even have to pretend to know the Constitution to be like, this makes sense. I don't care what it is. I want this. And the fact that it's going to be before the Republican voters come here in Texas, which is a deep red state, I predict that this is going to do really well.
And I do too. Okay, so listen, you mentioned the Horton Rule. I didn't name it that. Michael Bolden named it that. This just comes from all my experience driving a cab, because I'm a libertarian, and I met every single person in the world before. Okay, that was my job. And so what I figured out, and it's a pretty obvious truth, but maybe people just never thought of this before, is everybody's good on something. So if you're a libertarian and therefore good on everything, then you can find where people are good on something, agree with that, nail that down, and then extrapolate from there. That actually freedom is the answer to all of these questions, isn't it? And so we can be better than the left on the things that the left is good on, and we can be better than the right on the things that the right is good on, without being more left-wing or more right-wing than them. Just be ourselves. And and we're the defenders of all things good, and the opposers of all things aggressive and evil, and which distort our wonderful free market economy that we're supposed to have. And so that's the ticket here. That's what's happening here. Is Dan McKnight, Diego Rivera, these guys came home from George Bush's wars and Barack Obama's wars and said, okay, we're going to stand for the Constitution. And unlike the kind of mythology of the Vietnam War era, everybody's seen the Oliver Stone movie, Born on the 4th of July, where the idea is you come home from the war and then become a dirty, stinking, commie, hippie, drug abuser and oppose the war. Well, thanks a lot, Oliver Stone, but that's actually not really the best message to send. In fact, how about you got all these guys who came home from the war and they didn't move left at all? Diego Rivera and Dan McKnight and their team, these guys haven't moved left. They're libertarians and conservatives, Constitution guys, Republican Party guys, always have been. And they're the ones leading this. So that is my preface to my call to all the anti-war veterans in this audience, especially in Texas, but around this country too, that listen, man, this is something that you guys can get involved in with a bunch of really great guys who are already on your team. You know what I mean? It's something that where you can really help move the needle in a way that is in any given state where this passes, you're saving a guy's life, right? The rubber meets the road there. But on top of that, this is an earthquake in American society. The conservatives and constitutionalists and libertarians are using the Republican Party to introduce this anti-war legislation invoking George Washington's Constitution and the law of who is responsible for sending these guys to war and whether we're going to obey the law or let our government run riot around the world the way that they have. And when, by the way, we haven't won a war since 1945. So, you know what I mean? It's this to me. I'd almost go back in time and join the Army just so I could say that I'm with you guys on this. I can only just cheer for you and celebrate what you guys are doing and beseech anti-war veterans in the audience to join with Bring Our Troops Home and Defend the Guard, both .us.
You run your mouth and I run my business, brother. You tell everybody I'm busted. You talk so much you got me disgusted. But you run your mouth and I run my business, brother.
The Blinken rules of war. Oh, this was just, all right, we'll read this one paragraph. Mr. Blinken understands that Israel has more to do to defeat Hamas. Hamas cannot remain in control of Gaza. So there you go. They're getting rid of Hamas. What are they going to do once Hamas is gone? Who's going to run the territory? What are they going to do with all the residents of Gaza? What's the plan for all this? They're not talking about any of that. But the current people running it, we all understand they have to go, right? He reiterated a press conference in Israel Thursday. Israel campaign has so far secured most of the northern half. I don't know what else was in that paragraph. All right, here's the other paragraph. Paragraph 1-3. The best way to save civilians is to get them from far from urban combat zones. Now, I think this is like one of the most densely populated places, and we've already displaced 80% of the people. So the entire thing's an urban combat zone, but the safe thing we have to do is get these trapped people away from urban combat zones, away from Hamas strongholds like the city of Khan Yunis. But Mr. Blinken demands avoiding further significant displacement of civilians inside of Gaza. I don't know how much more you can displace if 80% of them are displaced. And I don't know if only 20% is left, you're past the significant part, but okay. Instead, he called on Israel to create safe zones. So in other words, like base. Listen, they reviewed it. They weren't sure how to treat the situation. And then someone proposed like a freeze tag type thing where we just need to have some bases. Like a while ago, I read on Zero Hedge, I think I said it here, there was this interesting thing about soldiers, un-American soldiers ending up being employed by our army. Because if you think about, like, I've often thought about, the argument for why it's important for American citizens to have guns and because it keeps the government in check. And I do believe that it does work that way because they can only get so tyrannical before they have to actually contend with the fact that there's an armed civilization. You go, yeah, but they've got an army. And then you start thinking, yeah, but does the army really want to go into Texas and fight Texans? Like the Texans would have what are they like? If it's something so horrible like slavery, I understand where you go. All right, I gotta go, or I guess preserving the union. I don't know. Let's not go into that rabbit hole. So I'm trying to make a different point here, and we don't have to ADD every single point. Sometimes we can have focus, a direct linear thought. For you to go and kill your fellow American citizen, I think you'd have to be paid quite handsomely to do so. And I would think you'd have to really be paying soldiers really, really well that they would take your side over the average citizens. Like if you're talking about an actual civil war against the government of people going, nope, we're not doing that. And they start rolling in the army with tanks. How many people are going to stand with the government as opposed to, your average citizens? Well, that dynamic can shift if instead of hiring American citizens for the U.S. Army, you start hiring, basically people that just came here. They might not have the same allegiances to their fellow American citizen as, somebody who's not actually from here. I think they were talking about, I forgot what their historical examples were of at the end of societies, essentially, hiring foreign militaries to do the dirty work because they would be more willing to, impose evil upon the citizens because they're not actually loyal to those people. So this, having heard that concept, and by the way, you can go down the Run Your Mouth archive. I read that article in a previous episode, but I saw this and I was like, holy shit.
What troubles me about the debate now about the southern border is it is one half of the immigration equation. Yes, we need order at the border. Yes, we need to have changes in the laws that reflect the reality of the overwhelming numbers from all over the world who are coming to our shores and our border. But there's also an incredible demand for legal immigration into this country even now. The presiding officer, my colleague from the state of Illinois, has legislation which addresses one aspect of that. Her bill, and I hope I describe it accurately, says that if you're an undocumented person in this country and you can pass the physical and the required test, background test, the like, you can serve in our military, and if you do it honorably, we will make you citizens of the United States. Do we need that? You know what the recruiting numbers are at the Army, in the Navy, in the Air Force? They can't reach their quotas each month. They can't find enough people to join our military forces.
I guess firstly, as a Democrat, who usually you guys don't like to contend with reality, and you like to go, but this is so terrible. Look at the plight of these individuals. Isn't there something cruel about going, yeah, but if you're willing to fight and die for us and being enslaved in our military, then you can earn your freedom? So firstly, for the people that like to pretend like usually we don't live in reality and go, you gotta be nice to these people. This doesn't sound like it's that. And it sounds like it's right in line with what I was hearing of just wait till they recruit themselves an entire military force that's not actually American citizens. Lowers the cost of or the ability of the government and military to, basically turn tyrannical and turn this into a police state. And then Massey made a very interesting point on his interview with Tucker Carlson, where he goes, those COVID mandates also forced the best Americans out of the military, kind of cleansed the military of the free thinking patriots, the people who might have more of an outlook like you and I. Like, think about how many of probably the best soldiers left the military on account of COVID mandates. And now you're looking to replace them with people that migrated to the country illegally. All right.
Welcome to Liberty Lockdown. Please scan your barcode. Your liberty ain't gone, but yeah, it's on hold.
Well, I mean, this is what is so concerning, is that because of this process, it's very natural that you're going to have very illiberal policies to deal with it, which is also quite counter to the world I want to live in, to the nation I want to live in. So it's
probably what they want. They want the chaos, so then they can implement more laws. They're probably causing this.
I completely agree, and that's actually where I'm going with this, is that what disturbs me about it is that the vast majority of people are totally oblivious to the fact that it's been both MI6 as well as the CIA, as well as Mossad, that has been funding much of the most radical elements of Islam in the Islamic world. Then they've had a bunch of unconstitutional, undeclared wars to go and destroy their nations, forcing these migration crises that then end up flooding both Europe as well as America. We're seeing another one today with Gaza, and I would imagine there will be 1 million or so Gazans that are supposed to flee somewhere because they're not going to be allowed to stay there, and it's going to end up being primarily Europe, but also the United States. And I don't think people are considering deeply enough what that means, both for us, domestically wherever we live, but also just how unbelievably stupid it is, so much so that it seems as if it can't be accidental. I mean, if you're going to destroy these nations, which unfortunately the U.S. government has been responsible for the vast majority of this, but the British have played their role dutifully alongside us oftentimes, but it has destroyed these people's homeland. So then, I don't even blame them for wanting to migrate elsewhere, because it's like if you have a drone flying over your head for 15 years in Afghanistan, I'd want to get out of there too. But then they go to these other nations, and then they want to reinstitute Sharia or whatever their preferred governance model is, and it's totally counter to the domestic population. And it just are people catching on to the fact that much of the radicalization that's happened in the Islamic world, or I assume some of your research has gone into this, are you privy to it?
I'm privy to, look, those unjust wars and those illegal invasions of those countries. Even America taking out Gaddafi, they knew they had to take out Gaddafi to open the floodgates of Europe, because it was Gaddafi that used to prevent them coming into Europe. Yeah,
right.
By taking out Gaddafi, they knew exactly what they were doing. And also, because it suited us when the Soviet were at war in Afghanistan, because it suited us against the Russians, we actually gave a base to all the radical jihadists in Britain. We allowed them. We funded ISIS. We've created most of them. Yeah. When I say we, again, they have. We haven't. Yeah? The same with Hamas, were created by Israel. The same. But that I try and differentiate those governing and in control who have made all these decisions with the people of the country. So
yeah, of course,
we're totally against it. I'd say most Jewish people in Israel are totally against what their government have done at times. Same with the American public, same with the British public. But they have orchestrated these wars for benefit, for money. I believe they want corporations to control the world. Few corporations governed by them, and to water down and break us down. It's like all these little conspiracy theorists, the attack on the family, the promotion of LGBTQ+, all these little things used to be individual things. It's like since COVID happened, they all just come together, It's like a jigsaw and all the pieces just fitted in, thinking you are attacking us from every angle.
Yeah.
And your purpose is to destroy and break down any resistance. So people, even like looking in our country, they've attacked our history, they've attacked our identity, because someone who doesn't know their history or understand their history ain't going to fight for it. They're not going to fight for who they are or their identity in their country. So they've purposely broke that down. They've purposely feminized us. But then the part is then you feminize the West, and then you bring in lots of masculine Muslims who are dominating the towns and cities, controlling the towns and cities. But then they all align together, like you're seeing now with the far left aligning with the Islamists, like we saw in Lebanon, like we saw in Iran. When the Islamists take over, they're the first people to get beheaded, the first people to get killed. But they're lying because they want to break down the system, they want to break down the rule of law, they want to destroy everything.
You personally have to pay a huge price. I mean, this constant legal battles, these legal fees, being thrown in jail, being pepper sprayed. I mean, what kind of toll has that taken on you?
At times, so I'm now 13, 14 years into activism. At times, I've been in some very dark places, man. I went into jail one person and come out another. It wasn't so. It's all this. So when I was in jail on the 2017 for reporting outside the case, I went to HMP Hull, which is a 5% Muslim population. I was fine. They then transferred me to the most densely populated Muslim population there is in the country, HMP Only, with a 35% Muslim population, where they then used that excuse to put me on solitary confinement. Now, when they put me on solitary confinement, so I wasn't allowed out of my cell. I wasn't allowed to see anyone. I wasn't allowed to do anything. Just sitting in a room for 10 weeks. But it was what they done. So they knocked on my door one day, prison officers did, and they said, "Where's your wife?" How do I know where my wife is? Yeah? Like the only time, so because they had to lock down the whole jail to get me out of the cell for 30 minutes during the day, and they'd only do it during the day. Between when the whole jail was locked down for lunch, I was allowed out to walk around on my own, for 30 minutes. That was my exercise for 30 minutes. So I couldn't speak to my wife, or my kids, because they're at school. My wife worked at a school. They go and say, "Where's your wife?" I said, "I don't know." And they said, "Well, there's intelligence she's going to be attacked with acid." And I said, and then they just shut the door. And I'm like,
my God.
It was a weekend before I could ring her. And they've gone to my mum's house. They've done the same. They've gone to my mum's house. They've gone to my wife's house. And this is where Americans, we can only dream of having a constitution. You have free speech. You now have no idea. We live in a post-free speech era. It's gone. It's a facade in Europe. It's not there. It's never been there. It's just, you try using it, you see what happens.
It's quite clear to me that we are facing, and you earlier you were saying how you wish you could have a constitution. You wish you could have free speech. Look, ours is very much in jeopardy. I'll grant you, it is much worse where you're at. But yeah, exactly. Where we are, as you said, we ought to be looking to that sphere of the world to understand what our imminent future is. And
person to say we need a reasonable peace deal in Ukraine. Now a lot of the neocons are quietly coming along to that position, with the exceptions of Nikki Haley and Joe Biden, who still support this, what I believe is pointless war in Ukraine. And I think those with foreign policy experience, one thing that Joe Biden and Nikki Haley have in common is that neither of them could even state for you 3 provinces in eastern Ukraine that they want to send our troops to actually fight for. Look at that. This is what I want people to understand. These people have, she has no idea what the hell the names of those provinces are, but she wants to send our sons and daughters and our troops and our military equipment to go fight it. So reject this myth that they've been selling you, that somebody had a cup of coffee stint at the UN and then makes $8 million after, has real foreign policy experience. It takes an outsider to see this through. Look at the blank expression. She doesn't know the names of the provinces that she wants to actually fight for. And there's a puppet.
That was brilliant. Look at her blank expression. She doesn't even know the provinces where she wants us to fight in. That's a moment. It's astonishing for me to hear people saying that she's surging, that she has this big base of support. Literally nobody likes her because she is not that smart. Let's put it that way, charitably. Remember last time her big thing was, you can't go on social media unless you use your real name. And then everyone pointed out, Nikki, you're not using your own real name. This is a fake name. You made it up. So, but this is a good one. Now, this is Nikki Haley at her finest. She's furious with TikTok. She's furious, and you'll never guess why. Let's put this next clip on and listen why she's so mad at TikTok.
We really do need to ban TikTok once and for all. And let me tell you why. For every 30 minutes that someone watches TikTok, every day, they become 17% more anti-Semitic, more pro-Hamas.
So,
anti-Semitic.
For every, this is amazing. For every 30 minutes you watch TikTok, you become 17% more anti-Semitic. And she figured that out somehow. I have to say, I don't want to put him on the spot, but our Intrepid Friday host had a comment on this, and I think it's a good question. Chris Rossini said, so after a few hours, you're 100% anti-Semitic? And then he asked a good question. Can you go over 100% if you keep watching after that?
I've worried about a new technology coming in, and she uses it, and that's this artificial intelligence. It's so artificial, and they put it together. There's no common sense. Artificial intelligence means it comes out of a machine and not out of a brain.
Yeah, I don't know. Let's listen to Marjorie Taylor Greene for about a minute and a half, because she's put on the conference committee, which means you should have a say. And so this is a good little bit. Really for Americans, this is a good little bit of behind the scenes of how things really work in D.C. Let's listen to Marjorie Taylor Greene.
I have been assigned. The NDAA is complete. I have been assigned to be a conferee on the conference. Here, we're going to follow me. We're getting in an elevator. And we didn't get to participate at all. As a matter of fact, the whole NDAA deal was made between Speaker Johnson, Chuck Schumer, and the House Committee And people like me, we didn't get to participate, and we were appointed to participate to make sure no money for abortion, no money for trans, for members like me standing up for Americans who were sick and tired of funding the Ukraine war. We had taken the $300 million out of the defense bill. Well, let me tell you what the final product is and the deal that was made. So the policy is in place. The funding is there for abortion travel. The policy is still in place for trans and the military and everything that goes with it. Democrat trans policy, Democrat abortion policy. $300 million for Ukraine is back in the NDA, even though I had worked hard to take it out, it's back in. And furthermore, here's the worst news. It gets a clean FISA extension through April. No change to the FISA court whatsoever. Nothing changed, and that deal was made also. So just wanted to give you a heads up. I'll be flat out no to this NDAA, and I think it's outrageous that this happened with our Republican-controlled Congress.
That's great.
Isn't that so blatant to bring that up? And they should suspect the people getting annoyed with this kind of stuff. But here it is, 3,000 pages, and they start by saying nobody's going to read it. She was on a committee.
Yeah, on the committee.
And she's the one that's supposed to help bring it together, but they had to get rid of her somehow or another, so they just excluded everybody from doing it. But they are so blatant. But that's essentially when it gets really, really serious, because indirectly most of this stuff is related to foreign policy. And declaration of war. They're just so open about it. Just think of Truman. Truman did a couple things, but not many. But the worst thing is he established immediately, just shortly after the UN was established, that and shortly after World War II ended, he says, "Well, we have to do this to save the world." And he says, "Well, no, this is." Somebody asked him about the war. He said, "This is not a war. This is just a police action." Golly. Exactly. So they get away with that, but they shouldn't. You need more people like Green in there, and there are a few, but it really boils down to a prevailing attitude, a philosophy of society, what comes out of our universities, what comes out of the very rich lobbyists and going on. The system is rotten, because the lobbyists are really running. It's all about the deep state.
Yeah. I mean, it's just incredible, and I'm glad she did it. Speaker Johnson's supposed to be a fighter for Republican causes. All the abortion money's in there. All the Ukraine money's in there. And the FISA. That's the big thing, because that was supposed to at least be a fight to extend that eavesdropping on American citizens. That should have been a fight. Nope, they roll over on that as well. It's disgusting.